Hello and welcome to this webinar. This is all about how to write a research paper. It is intended for folk who have been accepted under the Author Fellowship Programme of the SRAI. So it means we'll be talking about how to write research papers with a particular focus on the Journal of Research Administration, and also how to work with your peer advisor on the fellowship programme. However, you don't have to be a member of SRAI or part of the Author Fellowship Programme in order to view this webinar. In fact, anyone intending to write a paper for any journal will find some useful tips in here. My name is Cliff Studman. I've been a member of SRAI since 2001, since becoming a research manager. Previously, I was an academic researcher in New Zealand with a lengthy publishing record. I've also been on the editorial boards of several journals, including the JRA. Welcome also from the Author Fellowship Programme Committee members, who are Amy Cool-Shukers, Deb Derrick, Carson Harrod and Simon Kerridge. They provide programme leadership and support the Author Fellow / Peer Advisors pair throughout the 6 months of the programme. Amy, Deb and Carson are JRA editorial board members, while Simon is on the board of ARMA and served as a cohort 2 peer advisor. Okay, let's look at some objectives for this presentation, which has been divided into 4 parts for ease of access. Please don't hesitate to contact your peer advisor if you have any questions. Part 1. Obviously, we want to provide a guide to the fellows of the JRA Author Fellowship Programme. We want to explain the role of the peer advisor, just how he or she will help the author fellow, and what the peer advisor can and cannot do. Next, we want to provide some practical advice about how to write a paper. This covers things like getting started, writing blocks, language and style. In part 3, we plan to go over the structure of a typical research paper. This is about what goes where and what must be included. And in part 4, lastly, we will go through the process and the procedures which are involved in submitting a paper, getting refereed and getting published. We're going to make some assumptions about you. We will assume you have a project in mind already and that you have some data and some results which you will be able to look at. If you haven't, then we suggest that you should look at the first webinar on the JRAI authorship scheme, which deals with choosing a research project. And if you are a fellow, you should discuss your ideas with your peer advisor. Of course, we will assume you have a peer advisor or a supervisor for your research if you're not part of that scheme. If you are somewhere on the continuum between an idea and having data, then your peer advisor will help you move your project along. Next, a little bit about the SRAI peer advisors. All of them are volunteers, and they are giving time to help you with your paper. Just like all the editorial board members of the journal, they are doing this as a service to the society and to the profession of research administration. Most are working full-time in a research office, so I'm sure you will appreciate that their time is very valuable. I suggest you think about the scheme as a partnership in which the 2 partners, you and your peer advisor, each have very distinct roles. As long as you both do your roles, the programme will be a success. It will require time, effort and commitment from both the partners for success, and the peer advisors have been chosen according to their experience, knowledge and specific expertise, together with their willingness to help AFP fellows succeed in publishing their papers. So, what will your peer advisor do? Firstly, he or she will help you to refine your project, to make sure that you are focused on something specific and concise. This gives your paper a focus and also enables the peer advisor to have a good picture of what it is you have done and achieved. Your peer advisor will answer your questions. Ask if there is anything that is not clear to you or that you are not sure about. This avoids confusion and time wasting later. If he or she doesn't know, they'll say so and either find out or suggest how you can get your question answered. After all, the SRAI is about helping one another, and the JRA editorial board can deal with most questions if the advisor is stuck for an answer. It may take you a few discussions with your peer advisor before he or she understands your project. The more clearly you have thought it through, the quicker this phase will be. This seems to work best through one-on-one discussions by video link-ups. Your peer advisor may or may not be knowledgeable in your specific area. The aim is that you quickly become the expert, you, not your advisor. Your peer advisor will help you to plan and progress your paper. Initially, this will involve some direction, perhaps with regard to directing you to additional reading or research reports, or it may be on techniques to use in analysing data. Initially, your peer advisor may suggest various options for you to think about, approaches to take, or extra data to collect. As you progress your paper, your peer advisor's role will usually take the form of you sending drafts of sections and getting feedback from your peer advisor. The main purpose of this will be to ensure that the paper is well written and clear, and that all the necessary data is there and presented in the right place. Your peer advisor will be critical. Your ego may feel bruised by the process, but that is part of the learning process. He or she may provide some additional suggestions that require you to chase up more information or to think about incorporating some new angle on the work. If something is not clear, the peer advisor will generally say so, and it would be up to you to make it clear. If the peer advisor is using track changes in Word, then he or she will identify problems, usually as comments. Sometimes the peer advisor will put corrections in the text or suggest rewording. Quite often, we find that there are lots of duplications and repeated information in early drafts. Your peer advisor will be trying to identify this and to ensure the information appears in the right place and once only. He or she may suggest deletions, or that a paragraph is in the wrong place and needs moving. Regardless of what is suggested, you should carefully check all edits and comments and take them into account for the next draft. I recommend strongly that you also use track changes for your reply, and that you make it clear to the peer advisor how you are responding to the suggestions. Minor changes can be accepted without the need to comment, of course. He or she will often pick up spelling or grammatical errors. This is not the purpose of the peer advisor, but sometimes it is just as easier to identify them as not. More often, you'll find that he or she just points out a sentence that is grammatically incorrect or makes no sense, and leave you to work out what is wrong and how to fix it. Just remember to be nice to your peer advisor. They are volunteers, and they are also busy people with their own priorities and deadlines to meet. So try not to waste their time by ignoring their suggestions or by not at least considering what they suggest and responding. You don't have to agree with them, but at least be prepared to justify why you do not want to pursue a particular line of thought or an idea. Okay, So let's see what a peer advisor will not do. He or she will not be writing your paper for you. It's your work, not your peer advisor's, and he or she is not expecting to become a co-author either. You won't get really bad grammatical errors corrected. They will be identified, but it's your task to fix them. Your peer advisor really won't want to spend time pointing out lots of grammatical errors and spelling mistakes. You should be doing those checks by reading through your work and making corrections before you send it to your peer advisor. If there are a lot of these minor errors, it makes it harder for the peer advisor to focus on the real task of getting the information in the paper in the right form to submit to the journal. So it's a good idea to read what you have written out loud. Then any grammatical errors tend to stand out, and you can fix them before sending your draft away. Next, checking references is a slow and tedious task. Your peer advisor is not going to do it. You have to check that all the ones you cite in the text of the paper all appear in the correct format in the list of references at the end. This is a surprisingly challenging task, even with all the software available nowadays to help you with this. Part of the problem is that citations appear and disappear in the draft editing processes, and the reference list doesn't always get updated. And as if that's not enough, you also have to make sure all the references at the end are cited at least once in the main text. Your peer advisor won't be fixing errors in the citations. They will probably check over it to be sure you are doing things correctly, and you may have any problems pointed out, but again, it's up to you to fix them. Your peer advisor will inevitably need to fit working on your drafts into his or her already busy schedule, so try to be reasonable about your expectations on turnaround. So what does your peer advisor expect of you? The most important things are firstly to keep in touch, even if you have not been able to make progress due to other commitments. As long as your peer advisor knows what's happening, he or she will understand if you have to delay a response. Secondly, you need to respond to the advice. Help your peer advisor out by telling them how you have responded, either in a covering email or with track changes. Sometimes a peer advisor can receive a second draft that seems to bear little resemblance to the first draft, and they wonder what the author fellow did about the suggestions that were made. This can be a little disconcerting, to put it mildly. Thirdly, the peer advisor understands that you also have other commitments and that there will be times when you cannot give the paper a lot of attention. You do need to let your peer advisor know if you are not going to be able to respond immediately to his or her feedback. It's a courtesy as well as a necessary action. Lastly, it is up to you to make sure that what you write is consistent with the journal's guidelines and instructions. This is especially true if you are submitting to a different journal. Naturally, the peer advisor will have a reasonable knowledge of the JRA requirements, but you may need to help him or her if you are submitting to another journal. In summary, your peer advisor will want to focus on your content and structure, and not on these details, even though they are really important. Okay, so how do you get started with your peer advisor? First, it is good to make the initial contact via email and work out the best way for you to communicate. At the start, face-to-face meetings are the best, either in person or more likely over the internet. Your peer advisor will get a copy of your application so he or she will have an idea of your intentions, but it is probably a better idea to assume no knowledge and to explain the project from scratch. This is also a good plan since your thoughts and ideas may well have shifted since you put in your application. You will need to tell your peer advisor if you have any particular things that you are sure you will need help about. At the start is a good time to talk about anything you are not sure of. You may have questions that arise from watching this webinar, for example. It is also good to talk a little bit about yourself, your interests, maybe family or your background, and to get to know your peer advisor too. The more you know where you are both coming from, the better the relationship will be. It also helps later if there are family or work issues that might make it difficult for you to keep to a schedule on your writing. In the same way, your peer advisor will also have times when they are unable to respond quickly to you. You need to agree about how often you will communicate. As a suggestion, getting in touch by video conferencing once a fortnight at the start is quite a good basis for working together. But you and your peer advisor may want more or less contacts. As the project progresses, it may be less necessary to meet regularly and better to meet when there is something to discuss. You may even drop the video conferencing altogether. It's worth agreeing a format for meetings. I find a useful format is to ask the author fellow to drop me a brief email before the meeting saying how far they have progressed since the last meeting, how they address points and objectives that were set at the previous meeting, and what they plan to do in the next period. Also, identify anything they need help with. Then at the meeting, you can set some new objectives. The author fellow could agree to take notes of what was decided at the meeting and email them as well. That's up to you. In the same way, both of you will have other things to do, so it is good to communicate with each other about how soon you can respond to a draft. But these are matters to agree between the two of you, and it really depends on how both of you want to work together. I'm sure that as a research manager or administrator, you will have encountered researchers who are engaged in partnerships and collaborations. They are pretty much essential for any major externally funded project these days, especially if you're working internationally. When it comes to doing research, collaboration is usually a win-win option. Everybody gains. When it comes to writing papers, the same principle applies. There are real advantages in working with someone so that you do not have to do all the work, but you will still get the credit for a publication. So, as a general rule, all authors gain from writing a paper together with others. As a junior partner, for someone with an established publishing record, you will benefit from the experience of your co-author. There are a couple of practical details. You must be clear about the contribution each will make, and who will be first author and who second. The same applies particularly if there are more than two authors, simply because in many journals multiple authors are referred to as first author et al. In the text. This may sound petty, but it is a reality of publishing and developing a track record. When it comes to recognition of your effort, universities vary around the world. Some unenlightened institutes insist that co-authored papers gain only half a credit each, while some insist on allocating a percentage effort for each author. This sort of pettiness is a discouragement to staff from collaborating, which flies counter to the institution's research policy in all probability. In my view, any author, within reason, should get full credit for a paper, although that also can be abused, especially where there are more than three authors. An alternative approach to awarding recognition is the credit system. That's CREDIT, Contributor Roles Taxonomy. This is a way of recognizing contributions to a paper that is beginning to get recognition in publishing circles. It involves 14 types of contribution of roles that a person can make to a paper, regardless of whether the person is named as an author. These roles are listed on the next slides. More than one person can perform a role or contribute any number of roles. If this method gets adopted, then it will be up to authors to identify each person's contribution to each of the roles. It's not as difficult as it may sound. So here is a list of the roles. We haven't put the full definition of each on screen, but this is in the text of the PowerPoint, or you can look it up on the web. This list can also help you to think about some of the tasks which are involved in a research project or in writing a paper. So the full list is conceptualization, ideas, formulation or evolution of overarching research goals and aims, data curation, management activities to annotate, produce metadata, scrub data and maintain research data. 3. Formal analysis, application of statistical, mathematical, computational or other techniques to analyze or synthesize study data. 4. Funding acquisition, getting the money. 5. Investigation, conducting a research and investigation process, doing the experiment, collecting the data. 6 is methodology, development or design of the methodology, creation of a model. 7 is project administration, management and coordination, responsibility for the research activity, planning and execution. 8, resources, provision of study materials, reagents, materials, patients, laboratory samples, animals, instrumentation, computing resources or other analysis tools. Software, programming, software development, design of computer programs, testing of existing code components. 10 is supervision, oversight and leadership responsibility for the research activity, planning and execution, including mentorship external to the core team. 11 is validation, verification, whether as a part of the activity or separate, of the overall replication, reproducibility of results, experiments and other research outputs. Visualization, preparation, creation and or presentation of the published work, specifically visualization and data presentation. 13 is writing original draft, preparation, creation and or presentation of the published work, specifically writing the initial draft, including substantive translation. And 14, writing, review and editing, preparation, creation and or presentation of the published work by those from the original research group, specifically critical review, commentary or revision, including pre or post publication stages. The source for this is https://casrai.org/credit/. Phew. Okay, let us move on to talk about the JRA for a bit. Why should you choose the JRA? The main reasons are: it is the top journal for informing colleagues working in the research management and administration area of new developments and findings. Next, it is a fully refereed journal, assuring a high standard in all accepted and published papers. It's available to all SRAI members for free. It's available on the internet and is an open access journal, so your work can be found and read as widely as possible. It is published twice yearly and has been operating for 50 years. There are no publishing fees, mainly because everyone who works on it does so voluntarily. Costs are assumed by the SRAI as part of its overall operations. Of course, you may feel that your work should go in another journal because of its particular focus. That's fine, but remember that you can only publish a piece of work in one place, so you must choose your journal according to which audience you want to reach. Each journal has its own focus and will have different formats and refereeing systems. One tip is to consider which journals the bulk of your references are coming from and why. Also, remember that some journals charge fees for publishing. Whichever journal you choose, including the JRA, you need to do some key things. Above all, read the guidelines for authors. Check out the style of other papers in the journal so you get a feel for the way the journal is set out. Check any deadlines. JRA actually has none. Above all else, follow the guidelines. A note of warning. Be very wary of journals that offer to publish your paper fast. There are many so-called predator journals around now. Their titles look impressive, and they may claim many things. However, many of these have virtually no refereeing system and are not recognised by academic institutions. Any journal that promises a fast return around of your article, 1 to 2 weeks, for example, has to be suspect. They generate income from the charges to authors and have little else to contribute to the academic world. Some of the worst ones make inaccurate claims about their readership, while some unscrupulous people have been known to use the name of a recognised journal and create a scam website. Your library may be able to advise you about this if your department is not aware of the problem. Journals that are very new are also risky, since they have yet to prove that they will publish regularly or that they will stay in business in the long term. Of course, the JRA is backed by the Society and is one that has stood the test of time. The next few slides list the range of topics that can be included in the journal's scope. As you can see, there are a lot of possibilities. These topics are drawn straight from the journal's guidelines for authors. From time to time, of course, the list will change as new concerns arise. Indeed, your research may uncover new areas of interest. The JRA covers all of the following areas: the role of the research administrator, methods to improve research management, sponsored projects management, techniques to enhance the management of research, higher education industry partnerships, use of new technologies in research administration, knowledge management and information technology, research ethics and integrity, and some more. Standards for the responsible conduct of research, regulatory compliance, strategic planning and mission development, organisational theory and organisational psychology, human resource management, procedures that stimulate faculty interest in research, research financial management, research law. And there's more: intellectual property, technology transfer, continuing education goal, programs and professional development for all personnel, globalization of research, international relations, and, of course, other timely subjects that would be of interest to research administrators employed in the public or private sectors. So, as you see, the journal is very broad in its range of interests. And of course, the last item is a catch-all for whatever is relevant to research administration but hadn't been thought of. So the previous slides covered the topics. Now let's take a look at the types of articles or papers that can arise from these topics and that can be published in the JRA. Just as there are many topics, there are many ways in which one can report a scholarly study. So, there are many types of article as well that can be published. In practice, most articles fall into the first two categories. Research papers are where you have done a specific study which may involve some form of experimental study. For example, a comparison of two types of research administration structure, a survey of opinion or a before and after study. The researcher is not a part of the study and is observing or collecting data from the outside. The study is generally well structured and the resulting paper will follow a similar structured format. Reflective studies are also common. These generally involve some form of assessment or observation of a situation that the researcher is actually involved in. Changes to the ways in which things are done are a common topic for study. We will go into more detail on these later in describing how the results from these two studies will appear in a paper. Other types of acceptable article are theoretical or conceptual articles where the writer may suggest a new approach to an activity. Literature reviews or scholarly critiques, which involve reviewing critically a range of papers on the topic in question. A reflective commentary, perhaps where there has been a significant change in process and the author reflects on these events. Publication reviews, where the author will compile a report on a recent book or significant research program of interest to research administrators. Other types of article which are relevant to research administration. We won't cover these here, but instead we direct you to the guidelines for the authors, which describes each one of these. It also gives more detail on the first two research styles. When it comes to format and style, things are somewhat different. The journal has a very specific style which needs to be followed. For example, it has clear guidelines about how the names and affiliations of authors are to be presented, and also specific instructions about tables and graphs. Some things like footnotes are not allowed. Mostly the journal uses 12-point Times New Roman. References must follow the American Psychological Association, APA, format. That is, authors named in text with year of publication and full reference at the end in alphabetical order. APA is a standard used by many journals. A good way to understand the format of papers is to look carefully at how papers already published in the journal are constructed and arranged. Some examples of papers that are correctly formatted are the following. This is the end of the first section of this webinar. We invite you to reflect on the section for a little and then move on to section 2.